Hey, welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. For today's video, we're taking an early look at how Ubisoft's upcoming Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands game plays on the PC. This open-world tactical shooter offers gamers both single-player and four-player cooperative multiplayer modes. As a 10th installment in the Ghost Recon franchise, Wildlands is the first to offer an open-world environment. Ubisoft has said that this is one of the biggest open-world games they've ever created. The game includes a wide variety of environments such as mountains, forests, deserts and salt flats. Over the weekend there was a closed beta for the game, and by the sounds of it a huge amount of players checked it out. I myself spent quite a bit of time playing, not just benchmarking, and I have to say it was quite a bit of fun. As you might expect, performance at this point is questionable, but since the game is still in the beta phase we can't really criticise the developer too much. Just yet anyway. I have to say though, the game does look quite amazing, and I did find that reducing the quality settings ever so slightly did boost performance quite substantially. What was great to find is a huge amount of tweakable graphics options, as well as a neat little built-in benchmark for testing your system's performance. Ubisoft has also included a very cool preview of what it is that each setting does, so gamers can better tune their settings. This is something I wish more game developers did, as it is extremely useful. Since Wildlands does have a built-in benchmark, I decided to test using that as well as a 60-second Fraps pass. Please note that due to the game's beta status I haven't tested the usual 20 or so graphics cards. Just 8 GPUs have been tested, and yes, most of them are Nvidia based GPUs. I will invest considerably more time in testing the game once it has been officially released and proper driver support is being offered by AMD and Nvidia. So for now we have a small sample of graphics cards to look at, and please take these results with a big old grain of salt. These numbers will very likely change between now and the official game release in a month's time. For more information on the drivers used and the test system specifications, please check the video's description. So first up, let's check the results using the built-in benchmark. The GeForce GTX 1080 is good for just 71 FPS at 1080p using the very high quality preset. Considering we see well over 130 FPS in our Battlefield 1 test, there are some improvements to be made here. Of course, this is an open world game, but even the terribly optimized Mafia 3 pushed it around 90 FPS at 1080p with the GTX 1080. Anyway, as I've said, the game is still in the beta stage, so grab onto that grain of salt and hold it tight. Performance gets pretty ugly with the GTX 1060, which averaged just 49 FPS, and then the RX 480 with just 43 FPS. Interestingly, the 3GB 1060 takes a massive beating here, dropping down to just 38 FPS. So I do wonder that if in the final version of the game, the 3GB 1060 will still be over 20% slower than the 6GB model. Moving to 1440p, it's a frame rate bloodbath. The GTX 1060 6GB card averaged just 34 FPS, with regular visits into the 20s. The RX 480 was just a single frame slower, but of course this isn't the kind of performance 1060 or 480 owners will be looking for. Given what we just saw at 1440p, you probably don't need to see the 4K results, but here they are anyway in all of their stutteriness. The Titan XP is reduced to console levels of performance here, thankfully though we aren't playing at 900p. Okay, so we've checked out the built-in benchmark results, and the performance was quite brutal if I'm honest, using the very high quality preset. Let's now take a look at actual gameplay. I have found that the most demanding activity was driving. Frame rates are around 10 FPS lower when compared to just walking or running around. So here is our 60 seconds Frat Pass, where I drive around 3 hairy and heavily armed ghosts in Mum's minivan. When compared to the benchmark results, the Titan XP is now 16% slower, dropping down to an average of 67 FPS. The GTX 1080 is now 20% slower, and the GTX 1060 14% slower. AMD can also be seen taking some pretty big hits. The RX 480 is now 21% slower with an average frame rate of just 34 FPS at 1080p. Interestingly to note, whereas the RX 480 was 12% slower than the GTX 1060 in the built-in benchmark, it's now 19% slower. Moving to 1440p, I found it almost impossible now to drive the van with anything less than the GTX 1080. The Titan XP wasn't too bad, but for a graphics card of this caliber, the performance was less than desirable. Now at 4K, even the Titan XP can't maintain smooth playable performance at all times, and here gamers will be forced to reduce the quality settings in order to pick up some extra frames. Out of interest, I quickly checked how the very high, and medium quality presets compared in terms of performance when using the GeForce GTX 1080. The game is incredibly well detailed, and I know it's going to cop a heap of abuse for being unoptimized, even though we are just looking at the beta version. What I found interesting though was even with the high quality preset in use, the image quality was still excellent, and frankly not really that different to the very high settings. More importantly, performance for the GTX 1080 was boosted by almost 50%, and that's obviously huge. Even from high to medium, the game still looked quite good, and yet we found another 20% performance. Anyway, that's all the testing I've done for now, and I actually ended up doing a bit more than I set out to do. Some final notes worth mentioning: multi-GPU support doesn't exist yet, so SLI and Crossfire aren't working, but we do expect to see support for these technologies in the final version of the game once AMD and Nvidia release their drivers. The game at this point doesn't appear to be very CPU demanding at all, which is surprising. That said, I am yet to play with a full team of human-controlled players, but I don't expect this to change much. For now, the huge range of tweakable image quality settings is great, and that quality settings preview screen is amazing. The built-in benchmark is also very welcomed, and it gives an excellent amount of information about the system. Hopefully Ubisoft can polish performance a bit more before next month's release. And of course, I do expect game-ready drivers from AMD and Nvidia to make quite a big difference as well. In any case, what you can expect next month is a big in-depth benchmark video from Hardware Unboxed covering all the previous and current generation GPUs. And if it calls for it, I'll do some CPU testing on the final version as well. Well, that's a wrap for now. Please do take these results for what they are. They're just a rough guide, and we are hoping to see much better performance next month when the game's officially released. I'm your host, Steve, and stay tuned because we do have some more exciting videos coming later in the week.
Boom, target down.